At my daughter's wedding, my son-in-law's mother gave her a gift I will never forget. A maid's uniform. My son-in-law didn't just refuse to defend my daughter. He laughed and said, "Perfect. She'll need this to keep the house clean." My daughter endured it, silent, tears streaming down her face. But I didn't. I stood up and handed my daughter a box. "Now open my gift," I said. When everyone saw what was inside that box, the entire room fell silent in shock. Drop a comment. Where are you watching from? What time is it there? If this video is reaching you, it means you need to hear it. Just like Angela's phone call saved my daughter's life, your comment might save someone else's. 3 months before Tessa's wedding, my phone rang. It was my sister Angela, the younger one, though we hadn't really talked in years. Her voice came through tight, fractured, like something that hadn't been used in a very long time. "Benson, I need to tell you something, before it's too late." I met her that afternoon at a coffee shop in Capitol Hill. I almost didn't recognize my own sister. Angela looked like she'd aged a decade in the 15 years since I'd last really seen her. Not physically, though God knows she looked tired. It was something deeper, like someone had slowly erased her from the inside out. She ordered chamomile tea and didn't touch it. "I have nothing," she said without preamble. "You understand nothing. The house is his. The car is his. The bank account's all his name. Angela, let me finish." Her hands wrapped around the untouched cup. "I gave him everything. My career, my friends, my family. And when I finally asked for a divorce, I discovered I'd given him everything that mattered." She told me about Diane then, Adam's mother, how she'd encouraged her son to protect Angela, how control in Diane's world was another word for love. 15 years, Benson, Angela whispered. 15 years of asking permission. Permission to see my friends. Permission to work. Permission to exist. I watched my sister's hands shake around that cup, and something cold settled in my stomach. "Tessa's marrying Adam," I said carefully. Angela's eyes met mine. That was when I saw the fear raw and honest. "That's why I called you," she said. "If you don't protect her now, she'll end up exactly like me. Invisible, dependent, trapped." She leaned across the table, and I could see the desperation in every line of her face. "She needs her own house, Benson. Legal documents. Something with her name on it, only her name. An escape route. She needs to know before it's too late that she has choices. I'm talking about giving her what I never had. A way out." I drove home that evening with Angela's words circling in my mind like vultures. My sister, intelligent, accomplished, beautiful, had become a cautionary tale. A warning written in her own tired eyes. That night I couldn't sleep. I sat at my kitchen table with a calculator and a blank piece of paper, and I made a decision that would change everything. I was going to do what my father should have done for Angela. I was going to give my daughter a choice, even if it cost me everything. I was 67 years old, with 1 pension, 1 car, and 3 months. So I did what any father would do. I started selling the life I'd built. The first thing I sold was Margaret's jewelry box. I held the worn leather like it was sacred. 40 years of marriage sitting in my hands, pearls, white gold earrings, a small diamond ring. I whispered an apology to my late wife and sold them at 3 different jewelry stores. Then came the Nissan Suru. 8 years of fixing her myself, knowing every creak of her engine. A young couple bought her for their baby. I showed them how to check the oil and told them she'd last forever if they cared for her. Then I started taking the bus. My feet hurt in ways I hadn't remembered pain could hurt, but every ache reminded me of Tessa. On weekends I taught computer basics to seniors, checking email video, calling grandchildren. The pay was minimal, but it was something. 3 months of exhaustion. 3 months of living on coffee and determination. I met James Richardson in a small law office downtown. He was precise, careful, the kind of lawyer you want, handling something this important. I explained what I wanted: a house under Tessa's name alone. No exceptions, no joint ownership, no escape clause for her husband. James took off his reading glasses and looked at me directly. "That's unusual, Benson, and it could create tension in the marriage." "I know," I said, "but it has to be this way." "What?" I told him about Angela, about 15 years of invisible erosion, about asking permission to exist. James nodded slowly. "I understand. Let's make sure this is airtight." We found the house in Ballard on a Tuesday afternoon. It was small, 2 stories, a modest garden, a water view from the back patio. The real estate agent wanted to show me larger properties, but I shook my head. This one was perfect. This one felt like freedom. I signed the papers 3 weeks before the wedding. The house was now legally completely only Tessa's. No one could take it from her, and she didn't even know it existed. The day of the wedding arrived in a blur of white flowers and expensive suits. I sat in the front row with a small box in my jacket pocket, my hand touching it every few minutes to make sure it was real. Tessa looked beautiful. She always did. But as I watched her walk down the aisle, I saw something I hadn't wanted to see, a flicker of doubt in her eyes. Just for a second. Just enough that my father's instinct recognized it as fear. The reception was flawless. Catered. Expensive. Everything designed to impress. Diane made sure everyone knew the Thorns had paid for it all. Then Diane stood up. She held a box wrapped in expensive paper. Smiled that smile I'd come to recognize, the smile of someone who was about to humiliate you publicly and call it love. For our new daughter-in-law, she announced loud enough for 200 people to hear. Something practical. A proper wife understands her place. She opened the box slowly, deliberately. A maid's uniform, navy blue with a white apron. The room went quiet in a way that made my blood run cold. Adam laughed. He actually laughed and said, "Perfect. She'll need this to keep the house clean." I watched my daughter's face. I watched her eyes fill with tears. I watched her try to smile, try to pretend this was funny, try to make it okay. That's when I stood up. I didn't rush. I didn't storm. I simply stood slowly and deliberately, and every eye in that ballroom turned to me. I walked to my daughter. I took the uniform from Adam's hands and threw it on the table. Then I pulled out the small box from my jacket pocket. "My daughter deserves a real gift," I said, my voice steady and clear. I opened the box and handed Tessa the deed. Her hands shook as she took it. Her eyes moved across the words, confused, at first, then understanding, then filled with tears, but this time, different tears. "Read it," I said quietly. "Read it out loud." Her voice trembled as she spoke. "Property deed, owner Tessa Marie Bradley. Address 2847 Ballard Avenue, Seattle, Washington." The room was absolutely silent. 200 people, frozen. Diane's face turning from shocked to furious. Adam's expression shifting from amusement to something darker, something that looked like fear. And I realized they'd just lost control. Edward Thorne. Adam's father slowly stood. He was 72 years old, and I could see 40 years of regret written across his face. The room watched him. Everyone sensed something was about to shift. He walked over to where Tessa sat, still holding the deed, still trembling. He looked at her with an expression I couldn't quite read, something between pride and profound sadness. "You're a fortunate young woman," he said quietly. "A very fortunate young woman." Tessa looked up at him, confused. Edward's eyes moved to me. My daughter never had this kind of fortune. The reception had gone completely silent. 200 people had learned how to hold their breath. My daughter married young. Edward continued, his voice steady, but thick with something I recognized as pain. "She married a good man. That's what we all told her. A good provider, a good family, but good men can still be as controlling." Diane shifted in her seat. I could see her understanding where this was going. "Fait pas que sur 15 years," Edward said. 15 years of asking permission. Permission to see her friends. Permission to work. Permission to be herself. He looked back at me. When she finally left, she had nothing. No house, no savings, no options. And He paused. His jaw tightened. "I should have done what you just did. I should have protected her the way you're protecting your daughter." He put his hand on my shoulder. His grip was firm, and I could feel the weight of all those wasted years. "You did the right thing, Benson," he said. "I'm sorry my son isn't better." That's when Diane exploded. "Ernesto," her voice cracked like a whip. "How dare you? This is our family." Edward turned to face his wife. For a moment they locked eyes. I could see something shift between them. Something that had probably been building for decades. He simply sat back down. He didn't defend himself. He didn't argue. He just sat down and turned his attention to his plate, completely dismissing his wife's outrage. And that's when I saw Adam's face truly change. The smile was gone. His jaw went tight. His eyes went dark with something that looked less like love for his new bride and more like calculation. He leaned over and whispered something to his mother, something urgent and low. I didn't need to hear the words. I already knew what he was thinking. He'd lost control of the narrative. He'd lost the family's public support. And he'd just realized that the house his new wife owned, the house she didn't know existed until tonight, had just become a line he could not cross. He'd just become our enemy. After the honeymoon, I realized I was losing my daughter. The first sign was simple. Her phone calls became shorter. Where she used to ramble about her week, the funny thing that happened at work, a new recipe she tried, that dream she had about traveling to Costa Rica, now there were only monosyllables. Hi, Dad. How are you, sweetheart? Good. Adam needs me. Click. I told myself it was normal. Newlyweds needed time together. I convinced myself I wasn't being pushed out. I was simply making space. But then Brittany called me. Brittany Cole had been Tessa's best friend since high school. They'd worked together at the same marketing firm. Brittany's voice on the phone was cautious, like she was testing ice before stepping on it. Benson, I probably shouldn't call, but Tessa asked me not to contact her anymore. My stomach dropped. What we... Adam said her friendships were affecting their marriage. He said she needed to focus on being a wife now. And Tessa. Brittany paused. Tessa just agreed. Just like that. That's when I drove to Tessa's house unannounced. She answered the door in clothes I'd never seen before, conservative. Muted. Nothing like the colorful, confident woman I knew. Her hair was pulled back tightly. She looked smaller somehow. Hi, Dad, she said, but her eyes moved behind her to check if Adam was watching. How's work? I asked casually, as if I didn't already know something was wrong. Oh, I quit, actually. My heart did something that hurt. You quit, Tessa. You loved that job. I know, but Adam thinks it's better if I prepare for the future. For children. He wants me focused on home. She said it all very calmly, too calmly, like she'd rehearsed it. That evening I called Nancy Chapman Benson's sister, my support system, and I told her everything. The shortened phone calls. The friendships ended. The job abandoned. The way Tessa couldn't look me in the eye anymore. Nancy was quiet for a long moment. That's classic abuse, Benson, she said finally. Isolation. No job means no money. No money means no independence. No independence means no escape. He's isolating her. I said the reality of it crashing down on me like a wave. He's building a cage, Nancy corrected. And the worst part, she can't see the bars yet. I hung up the phone shaking. All those legal documents, all that planning. The house I'd sacrificed everything for, and it meant nothing if my daughter was too afraid, too isolated, too dependent to use it. Adam had learned something from his family's public humiliation. He'd learned to work quietly, to control not through grand gestures, but through small daily erosions, permission structures, financial starvation, social isolation. The house on Ballard was sitting empty in her name, and she was disappearing anyway. I realized that night that the deed alone wasn't enough. My daughter didn't just need a way out, she needed to know she deserved to take it. We sat in James Richardson's office on a gray Tuesday afternoon. Same lawyer who'd drafted the house deed 3 months ago. Only this time we weren't there to secure Tessa's future. We were there to save her present. Tessa was nervous, glancing at the door constantly. When James walked in professional kind in that measured way lawyers learn to be, she tensed. Does Adam know you're here? I asked quietly. No, Tessa whispered. He thinks I'm at a doctor's appointment. James placed the house deed on the table. This property is yours, completely, legally. Your husband has no claim on it. He didn't wait for her to absorb it. Does he monitor your phone, your location, your friendships? Tessa nodded to each question, tears filling her eyes. What you're describing is psychological abuse, James said. It's illegal. Love doesn't isolate. Love doesn't control. But he says he loves me, Tessa said, voice breaking. He's protecting me. Protection doesn't look like a prison, James replied. This is control, nothing more. He pulled out another document. Do you want to file for divorce? Tessa looked at me. In that moment, I saw my daughter recognize herself again, not as Adam's wife, as Tessa. Yes, she whispered. We left with the paperwork an hour later. When we pulled into the driveway, my stomach dropped. Adam's car was already there. He knew something was wrong the moment we walked in. His eyes moved from Tessa to me, calculating predatory. Where have you been? Before she could answer, he saw the envelope. He grabbed her purse, pulled out the divorce papers, read the first line. His face transformed into something darker than anger. Bah, divorce papers. His voice was barely a whisper. He grabbed Tessa's arm and pulled her toward the stairs. Upstairs. Now. Adam, please. He dragged her into the bedroom and slammed the door. The deadbolt turned from outside. I heard Tessa pound on the door. Adam, let me out. Nothing. I didn't hesitate. I grabbed my keys and walked out. Adam didn't stop me. I sat in my car, parked down the street, engine running, phone in my trembling hand. I couldn't leave my daughter alone with him. Not now. The minutes felt like hours. My heart hammered against my ribs. Every cell in my body screamed to go back, in there. Break that door down, pull my daughter out. But I forced myself to stay calm. The law was our weapon now. I just had to wait. At 11:17 p.m. my phone buzzed. Unknown number. But I knew that voice, Tessa whispering, "Dad, he locked me in. I can't get out. Please save me." When Tessa's terrified whisper came through my phone, "Dad, he locked me in," I didn't hesitate. I hung up and dialed 911. "My daughter is being held against her will," I said. "She's locked in a bedroom. She's in danger. I'm sending the address now." The operator's voice was calm, professional. "Units are dispatched. They're 3 minutes out." I drove faster than I should have. My hands gripped the steering wheel so hard they hurt. Every second felt like a lifetime. When I pulled up to the house, 2 police cars were already there, lights silent but urgent. Officers were heading toward the front door. I got out of my car and ran. One of the officers, a woman with her hand on her belt, stopped me. "Are you the father?" "Yes, my daughter, she's upstairs. She's locked in." "We know. We're going in." They moved through the house with practiced precision. I followed, upstairs, down the hall. That was when Adam appeared, blocking the bedroom door. "This is my house," he said, his voice steady, calculating. "She's my wife. There's nothing illegal here." The officer badge reading Martinez looked at him directly. "Is the door locked from the outside?" Adam's jaw tightened. He didn't answer. "That's false imprisonment," Officer Martinez said. "It's a felony in Washington state." From inside the room, Tessa's voice broke through. Desperate, small, terrified. "He locked me in. Please, please help me." Officer Martinez nodded to her partner. He pulled out a tool, practiced, efficient, and broke the lock. The door swung open. Tessa stumbled out, tears streaming down her face. She looked for me, and the moment our eyes met, she ran. She crashed into my chest, and I wrapped my arms around her like I could protect her from ever being hurt again. "You're safe?" I said into her hair. "You're safe now. I've got you." I didn't realize I was crying. Officer Martinez turned to Adam, her voice steady and cold. "You're under arrest for false imprisonment and domestic violence. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." As they cuffed him, Adam looked at me. His eyes burned with something dark, rage, disbelief, desperation. "You destroyed everything," he said. "You destroyed us." I held my daughter tighter and looked him straight in the eye. "No, Adam, you did. I just saved my daughter." As they led him to the police car, Tessa clung to me like she'd never let go. Her whole body shook with relief, with fear finally released, with the knowledge that this nightmare, this chapter of her life, was over. Outside, the night was cold, but for the first time in months, my daughter was free. Tessa sat across from Detective Morgan in a small room at the police station. Her hands trembled as she held a cup of cold coffee, but her voice, when she finally spoke, was steady. She told him everything, every lie Adam had told her. Every way he'd controlled her finances, monitored her phone, dictated who she could see. Every moment she'd been terrified to speak, to move to exist without permission. She described the isolation, how friendships dissolved, how her job became impossible, how she'd slowly disappeared from her own life. 15 months of psychological manipulation laid bare in painful detail. Then, almost whispering, she revealed something she had told no one: she was pregnant, only a few weeks along, and terrified Adam would use the baby to trap her. The detective's pen stopped. He wrote the rest slowly, his expression darkening. "This is serious," he said when she finished. "False imprisonment, coercive control, psychological abuse. We have a strong case." I watched my daughter nod, and I saw something I'd been waiting months to see, a spark of understanding that none of this was her fault. 3 months later, we stood in a Seattle courtroom. James Richardson stood beside Tessa, calm and prepared. Across the room, Adam sat with his lawyer, a man in an expensive suit who kept whispering strategy. The judge entered, stern, composed, familiar with cases like this. Adam's lawyer argued first. He insisted she could have left, claimed the door wasn't locked, suggested her fears were exaggerated. He painted it as a troubled marriage, not a crime. When he finished, James Richardson rose. "Your Honor," he said, voice steady, "false imprisonment isn't always physical. It's psychological captivity. My client was monitored constantly. She had no money, her husband controlled every decision, no job, he convinced her to quit. She was isolated from every source of support. Friends, family, all removed." He paused. "That is not a difficult marriage. That's a crime. and Ms. Bradley's early pregnancy made her even more vulnerable. The judge leaned forward. "Mr. Thorne," she said, looking directly at Adam, "do you have anything to say?" Adam's jaw tightened. He stayed silent. The judge nodded. "Based on the evidence Detective Morgan's report and the testimony provided, this court grants divorce on the grounds of domestic violence and psychological abuse. The property at 2847 Ballard Avenue remains the sole property of Tessa Marie Bradley. Full custody of any children born of this marriage goes to Ms. Bradley. Mr. Thorne will pay child support as required. A permanent restraining order is issued. No contact, no communication." The gavel fell sharp and final. Adam stood, shock flickering across his face. His lawyer whispered urgently, but he didn't hear him. He stared at Tessa. She met his eyes without fear for the first time. Not anger, clarity. Outside the courthouse, Tessa walked down the marble steps holding the divorce papers. The Seattle sun felt too bright after months of darkness. Wind lifted her hair, and for a moment she looked like herself again. She found me waiting. We didn't speak. We just held each other. She cried, not fear, not despair, but release, survival. "It's over, Dad," she whispered. "No," I said gently. "Now the healing begins." That night she slept at my apartment for the first time in nearly 2 years. She fell asleep on my couch beneath a blanket I'd bought back when I didn't know if she would survive this. I sat beside her, hand on her shoulder, making sure she knew she wasn't alone. For the first time since Angela's warning call 3 years earlier, I felt something close to peace. The nightmare was finished. My daughter was free. And within that freedom, her baby new life waited to arrive. Even as she slept, I could see how exhaustion clung to her, the kind that settles into a person after years of being afraid to breathe. Yet beneath it, there was something new taking shape. A steadiness, a quiet resolve. She wasn't just escaping anymore. She was rebuilding. She was protecting the child growing inside her, a child conceived in darkness, but now carried into the light. I realized then that freedom wasn't just the absence of Adam. It was the beginning of a life where she finally belonged to herself again, and she deserved every moment of it. 6 weeks after the divorce was finalized, Tessa gave birth to Aurora on a Tuesday morning in late spring. When the nurse placed that tiny girl in my arms, I broke down completely. She was perfect. Completely, impossibly perfect. 10 fingers, 10 toes, eyes that hadn't yet learned what the world could do to them, and she was free. Tessa lay in the hospital bed, exhausted but radiant. "She's here, Dad," she whispered. "Aurora is here." I looked at my daughter, then at my granddaughter, and finally understood why I'd sold everything. Why I'd sacrificed my wife's jewelry, our car, my pride, my sleep. Why I'd sat in a car watching a dark house at midnight. "And she's free," I said. "She'll never know what it feels like to ask permission to exist." 3 weeks later, Tessa came home to the Ballard house. She moved through those rooms, slowly touching walls, like she was reacquainting herself with freedom. Aurora slept upstairs, and Tessa found herself in the garden, the one she'd never had time to notice during those dark months. She sat on the bench I'd bought for her, and she laughed. It was a real laugh, not the careful, controlled sound she'd perfected during her marriage, not the exhausted courtesy of a woman pretending to be okay. It was genuine, unguarded, hers. I watched her from the kitchen window, and I felt something I'd been carrying loosen inside my chest. My daughter was coming back to herself. 3 months after Aurora's birth, Tessa returned to work. She went back to the marketing firm where she'd first become herself, before Adam, before isolation, before the invisible cage. Her boss called her into his office on her first day back. "Tessa," he said, "we want you to know how much we valued having you here, and we want to value you more." He offered her a promotion, creative strategy director, full autonomy, a significant raise. Tessa accepted without hesitation. For the first time in nearly 3 years, she had control over her own future. She arranged childcare. She built a routine. She remembered what it felt like to be needed for her talents, not owned for her compliance. One afternoon, while Tessa was reorganizing the garden with Aurora playing nearby, a man approached. Jacob Turner, a teacher at Aurora's daycare. He was kind in the way genuinely kind people are. He asked Tessa's opinion. He listened to her answers. He never decided anything for her. "Would you like to grab coffee sometime?" he asked carefully. "Only if you want to. No pressure." Tessa looked at him, really looked at him, at his gentle eyes, at the way he stood back and gave her space instead of closing in. "I'd like that," she said. "I'd like to see where this goes." What struck me most was how easily she said it, not asking permission, not overthinking, just making a choice about her own life. One evening I came by the Ballard house to visit Aurora. I found Tessa in the garden, my granddaughter on her lap, both of them golden in the sunset. Tessa looked up at me and I saw it clearly, the woman my daughter was always meant to be. Strong, independent, capable, radiant. "How are you feeling?" I asked, sitting beside them. "Like myself again, Dad," she said. "Like I'm allowed to be happy." I looked at the house behind us. The house I'd sacrificed everything to buy. The house that had become more than shelter. It had become a symbol, a promise, a second chance. "That house saved your life," I said quietly. Tessa shook her head. "No, Dad, you saved my life. But this house gave me permission to live it." One afternoon I sat on the bench in the Ballard garden watching Tessa play with Aurora. Flowers were blooming, the sun was warm, and my daughter was smiling. Jacob Turner arrived with coffee for both of us, a small kindness, nothing more. He sat beside me, giving Tessa space, never demanding her attention. That's what I noticed most about him. He understood that love meant stepping back sometimes. Tessa held Aurora up, pointing at the garden. "Look at the flowers, baby. They only bloom when they're free to grow." Aurora laughed, a clear, fearless sound that echoed through the garden. Tessa set her daughter down and watched her explore the grass. Then she turned to me, and I saw something in her eyes I'd been waiting months to see clarity. "Do you know what's special about this house, Aurora?" Tessa asked, kneeling beside her daughter. Aurora shook her head, concentrating on a flower. "It's yours," Tessa said. "Only yours. And when you grow up, no one can take it from you." She paused, letting that sink in not just for Aurora, but for herself. "You're going to have choices, baby," Tessa continued. "Always choices. About where you live, who you love, how you spend your days. Choices." I felt tears building behind my eyes. Tessa looked up at me and she nodded slowly, like she was finally saying something she'd been holding inside for a long time. "That's what your grandpa gave me, Aurora," she said. "Not just a house. Freedom." She stood and pulled me into a hug. I could feel her strength now, not the fragile survival strength of someone enduring, but the solid strength of someone who'd found herself again. Jacob's hand rested gently on her shoulder. Not possessive, not controlling, just present. "I'm proud of you," I whispered to Tessa. "So proud." "I know," she said, and she meant it. She wasn't waiting for external validation anymore. She knew her own worth. I watched them there in the garden, my daughter, my granddaughter, and a man who understood that loving someone meant letting them be free. 3 generations of women, one who'd taught her daughter about independence through sacrifice, one who'd fought her way back to freedom, and one who would never have to fight at all. My work was done. Tessa didn't need me to save her anymore. She could save herself. I stood to leave, ready to go home and rest. My bones ached. My heart felt lighter than it had in years. "Dad, wait," Tessa called out. "I need to tell you something." I turned back, wondering what else my strong, beautiful daughter needed to say. Tessa caught up to me at the garden gate. She grabbed my hand, something she hadn't done freely in so long, and held it tight. "I need Dad to know one thing," she said. I turned to face my daughter, and I saw her clearly strong, free herself. "That Maid uniform," Tessa said. "The one Diane put in that box. The one she expected me to wear. I never wore it, Dad, and I never will." "I know, sweetheart. But that's not what I wanted to tell you," Tessa continued. Her eyes were steady. "I wanted to tell you that you gave me more than just a house. You gave me a message." She squeezed my hand. "You told me I had choices, that I had an escape route, that I mattered, that I deserved protection, that I was free." I felt tears come, but I let them. There was no shame in a father crying for his daughter. "You always deserved that, Tessa," I said. "You always deserved all of it." She pulled me into a hug, and I could feel the strength in her, the solid, unbreakable strength of a woman who'd fought her way back to herself. As I drove away from the Ballard house that evening, I found myself thinking about all the questions people had asked me over the past year. Did a house really save her? Was buying property enough? The answer I'd learned was no. It wasn't the house. It was the message the house carried. "You have choices. You have an escape route. You matter." Those were the words that saved my daughter. Not the square footage or the view or the legal deed. The message. Freedom doesn't come free. It costs sacrifice. It costs time. It costs the jewelry your wife wore for 40 years. It costs the car you maintained with your own hands. It costs 3 months of exhaustion and borrowed courage, but it's worth every penny. I glanced in my rearview mirror one last time before turning the corner. Tessa was back in the garden with Aurora and Jacob. My granddaughter was laughing a clear, fearless sound, the kind of laughter that only children who've never been afraid can make. My daughter was teaching her daughter what I'd taught her, that freedom isn't negotiable, that choices aren't luxuries, that every woman deserves to know from the moment she enters this world that she has options. That maid uniform would never be worn, and that I realized was the greatest victory a father could ever know. Not that I'd won against Adam, not that justice had been served, though it had, but that 3 generations of women would now know, with absolute certainty, that they were free, and that freedom, hard-won, expensive, precious, would continue forward. My daughter would teach my granddaughter, and my granddaughter would teach hers, breaking the cycle, protecting each other, choosing love over control always. As I drove home through Seattle's quiet evening streets, I understood something fundamental. I hadn't just saved my daughter's life. I'd given her the tools to save herself. And she was already teaching her daughter how to do the same. That was legacy. That was everything. My name is Benson Bradley, and this is my true story. For years, I watched my daughter disappear into a marriage that looked perfect from the outside. I told myself it wasn't my place to interfere. I told myself she'd figure it out. I was wrong. So don't be like me. Don't wait. If someone you love is being controlled, manipulated, isolated, speak up. Your grandpa's stories might save a life. Your willingness to listen might be the escape route someone desperately needs. This true story taught me one profound lesson. Freedom isn't free. It costs sacrifice. It costs time. It costs everything you're willing to give for someone you love. But God doesn't create us to live in cages. He creates us to choose, to flourish, to be free. When my granddaughter Aurora laughed in that garden, fearless, unafraid, I understood why I'd given everything. Because 3 generations of women would now know they had choices. That true story of Tessa's escape became my mission to share with the world. These grandpa stories aren't just entertainment. They're warnings. They're hope. They're proof that it's never too late to fight back. If you recognize yourself in this true story, if you're trapped, controlled, or afraid, please reach out. You deserve freedom. You deserve choice. You deserve to laugh without fear. Comment below. Share this story. Subscribe to our channel for more real, raw stories that matter. Because every grandpa story has the power to save someone. Every true story deserves to be heard.